I'm Tim Owens, the longtime producer of jazz at National Public Radio and creator of NPR's Peabody Award-winning Jazz Profiles, a radio documentary series on the people, places, and things in jazz. The Jazz Profiles shows, nearly 200 of them, are part of the Tim Owens Jazz and Broadcast Collection at the University of North Texas Music Library. And in a partnership with the 32 Bar Blues Foundation, we've picked a handful of noteworthy shows to share with you. With my gratitude to the many producers who helped make the series possible, and my special thanks to the series host Nancy Wilson, we hope you enjoy this presentation of Jazz Profiles.
He would go for the energy and for the excitement. That's why he's successful.
I think he communicated with his audience very well, and he had a performance style that was very popular, especially with the ladies.
Herbie's not a particularly handsome man in the traditional sense of the word, but there was something very earthy about him, and almost animal-like.
There is a word that all jazz musicians are familiar with. The word is groove. It conveys a sense of excitement, rhythm, and swing, and it perfectly describes the music of flutist Herbie Mann.
Herbie always utilized players that played the music. You know, he went down to Brazil, recorded a Brazilian album. Used Brazilian players, Sergio Mendes, John Donato. He always worked with people that played the music.
There's no doubt about the fact that he can manipulate that instrument of his both melodically and rhythmically in very unconventional ways.
I'm Nancy Wilson. On this edition of Jazz Profiles, a 70th birthday tribute to Herbie Mann. When Herbie Mann started playing music in the 1940s, there were no jazz musicians specializing on the flute. It was just another woodwind instrument, used occasionally by saxophonists. But in the 1950s, Herbie changed all of that. He became the most famous flute player in the world, and in the process helped bring the world's music to jazz.
My musical taste is like a smorgasbord table. I listen to everything.
Herbie Mann has always been a restless spirit, forever looking to the next musical plateau. Beginning with Afro-Cuban music, Herbie experimented with a variety of musical styles, including Latin, Middle Eastern, R&B, reggae, funk, and even disco. Atlantic Records executive Arif Martin.
He always looked for new horizons, exploring, new avenues, and that's why his music is so varied at the same time, so anchored and seeped in rhythm energy. He always went for the energy, and on top, he would put his beautiful flute lines.
Herbie Mann likens his style to playing on top of the waves of whatever the rhythm is playing. Afro-Cuban music historian Raul Rico Jr.
Latin music has always been associated with Spanish and vocals, and that sometimes alienates audiences. And when Herbie approached it with an instrumental sense, that opened it to the masses and also opened it to his audience.
But of all the musical styles Herbie Mann studied and recorded, his favorite remains the melodic and intoxicating sounds from Brazil. In the 1960s, Herbie Mann was responsible for helping popularize the Brazilian style known as bossa nova.
Anytime I get depressed, even now, all I have to do is put on Brazilian music, and it'll just lift me up.
Herbie Mann wasn't satisfied with establishing a role in jazz for the flute. He brought in other instruments from the flute family to convey different moods, handmade flutes from other cultures, whistles, recorders, but especially the warm, rich sound of the alto flute.
Alto flute is the most beautiful sounding instrument I think there is. Well, you know, when Max Roach and Art Blakey used to come to the clubs to hear me play, they'd say, play the big one.
Between 1957 and 1970, Herbie Mann won the Downbeat Readers' Poll as the favorite flutist in jazz, due in part to his showmanship and despite the constant changing of his style. Herbie was like a chameleon, always shedding his skin and adapting to a different background. His experiments delighted his fans, but baffled jazz critics, who accused him of selling out. Former manager John Levy.
I think he put himself in a box with the critics and the people because they didn't really relate to him as an entertainer. And they wanted to compare him, say, in comparison with jazz musicians per se. I mean, he was a jazz musician, but he was also an excellent performer. And he knew exactly how to please the crowd. Him being an excellent showman. He had a style of playing, and I used to tease him about it. I used to say he was like a ladies' man because he would pose. He had a certain pose when he played, and sort of like you might say Elvis would do. He'd sort of swing his hips and blow his balloon.
Herbie Mann's music has been constantly evolving. The so-called evolution of man has made him one of the most adventurous and successful artists in the history of jazz. In the past 40 years, few people have done more to expand the cultural and geographical boundaries of jazz than Herbie Mann has. You're listening to NPR's Jazz Profiles with a tribute to Herbie Mann. I'm Nancy Wilson.
From blues to bluegrass, jazz to country, R&B to rock and roll, we're moved by the proud sound of American music. Welcome to 32 Bar Blues, a fresh groove in the men's clothing world, a place where true originality, craft, and style are valued like the art forms we celebrate. Never curated or private labeled, we design and make the majority of our styles in-house. Cool clothes with enough funk or personality to make you smile, but easy to wear for most any venue. And like our name implies, 32 Bar Blues was born with a heart for the arts. Since our first collection in 2012, we featured more than 100 musicians, writers, and photographers on our pages, giving all profits from the sale of their work directly to them. We also promote a handful of nonprofit arts organizations that deserve extra support. To check out the 32 Bar Blues collection and learn more about our commitment to the arts, visit 32barblues.com.
Herbie Mann was born Herbert J. Solomon in Brooklyn, New York on April 16, 1930, the son of Romanian and Russian parents. Music, especially rhythm, got into his blood at an early age. When he was 6, he started banging on pots and pans in the family kitchen.
I originally wanted to be a drummer, but my cousin convinced my mother that she should take me to hear Benny Goodman because the clarinet, for a beginner, doesn't bother the neighbors as much as the drums do. So she took me to the Paramount in 1939 in a matinee on a Saturday afternoon, and 2 weeks later I had a clarinet. So first I wanted to be Benny Goodman. Then when I moved to the tenor saxophone, I wanted to be Illinois Jack Cat, Coleman Hawkins, Illinois Jack Cat, eventually Lester Young. I can't really say now whether it was the music or it was the power he had over the audience that attracted me. You know, 1939 at the Paramount is like the Beatles, was that kind of hysteria.
In 1948, Herbie began serving 4 years in the Army at Trieste, Italy. While he waited for his discharge and with his mind on music, he played saxophone in a military band.
And I went into the Army, and I wanted to be Lester Young. And when I got out, I found out that Stan Getz, Al Cohn, Zoot Sims, Broom Moore, and Alan Eager beat me to it.
With the saxophone field crowded, Herbie fell back on his second instrument, the flute.
And flute was only an instrument that my teacher thought I would have to play if I was going to be a successful studio musician. In 1943 and 1945, there were no jazz flute records. My flute experience was Essie Morales playing Jungle Fantasy.
Jungle Fantasy by Essie Morales and his Latin American Orchestra, recorded in 1948. The record had a dramatic impact on Herbie Mann. He adapted elements of Morales' effervescent style, making it his own. Now, here's Herbie Mann's own version of Jungle Fantasy, recorded for Columbia in 1965.
2, 3, 4, 2, 3.
When Herbie Mann started playing the flute regularly in the early 1950s, the most prominent jazz style was bebop. Few, if any, flutists were playing jazz at this time, so Herbie turned to other instruments for inspiration.
So I said, well, why don't I listen to trumpet players? So I listened to Miles, and Dizzy, and Art Farmer, and Clifford Brown, and that's what I based my style on.
Chicken Little, from Herbie Mann's first album for Bethlehem Records in 1954. In the 1950s, Herbie Mann played with the elite of bebop, including Milt Hinton, Art Blakey, Tommy Flanagan, Kenny Clark, and Percy Heath. Other flute players recorded with him, including Sam Most, Bobby Jasper, and Buddy Collette. But even in those early years, Herbie Mann felt restrained by bebop's musical boundaries.
Straight-ahead music is in a box. It's 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Ethnic music is in a circle. It bubbles more for me. I just never really felt comfortable just playing straight ahead.
Soon, elements of Latin music began creeping into Herbie's repertoire. He began making records with Dutch accordionist Matt Matthews and his group, the New York Jazz Quartet. By the mid-50s, Herbie had developed an astounding technique and command of his instrument. The sound of the flute was changing in jazz. No longer was it a timid, feathery breeze on the musical landscape. In Herbie Mann's hands, it was transformed into a ferocious tornado of sound. Dr. Gerard Bayag is a professor of ethnomusicology at the University of Texas.
If I compare the flutes of the early ensembles of Brazilian popular music of the 1920s and 30s, in which the flute was very important, the flute there was still a very timid instrument, you see. With Herbie Mann, it's a totally different approach. Of course, he's very convinced of the potential, essentially, of the solo instrument.
In 1957, Herbie Mann made the first of 3 albums for the Verve label. Together, these albums would signify a dramatic change in his sound. The Magic Flute of Herbie Mann featured one song that was getting significant airplay on a radio show hosted by New York disc jockey Symphony Sid Turin.
And of all the tunes that got played, it was the one tune that I made up with a little African flute and a percussion section, made it up on the spot, and that was the one that Symphony Sid played.
The song was appropriately called Evolution of Man. New York audiences, especially the city's Hispanic and African American listeners, loved the new sound. At Symphony Sid's urging, Herbie added percussionists to his band.
By adding the Latin instruments, all of a sudden, the audience had a point of reference, because in the Latin bands, the flute players were the improvisers. All of a sudden, they said, "Oh, the flute. That's right, it's with conga drums, and and bongos and timbales. It was obvious that my future was not in Charlie Parker. It was in Tito Puente Machito, Dona Carlos Jobim.
Herbie Mann's new Afro-Cuban band caused a sensation in New York nightclubs. The city was already a hotbed for Latin-flavored groups, led by the famed Machito Orchestra, featuring Mario Bauza. From these groups, Herbie added percussionists like Rudy Collins, Ray Mantilla, and Carlos Patato Valdez.
The Latin band leaders in New York hated me. They were paying these guys $45 a night. I was paying them $150. So I was stealing their rhythm sections. I remember a funny story once. We played a gig at City Center, and on the show was also the Machito band. So I get ready to pay Patato. He said, "Pay me in front of Mario and Machito." And I said, "Patato, here. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 20, 40. Oh no, what's happening?" Patato says, "Respect."
Herbie Mann's interest in Afro-Cuban rhythms and melodies convinced him to go to their source, Africa. In 1959, the U.S. State Department funded a trip there after hearing a recording of Herbie's African Suite, which consisted of traditional native tunes. Herbie and his band toured 17 African countries, listening to the local sounds, buying traditional instruments, and performing.
We'd start the gigs by playing Caravan, and I'd play it in 3 different styles, then check out the audience and see which one they liked, then the rest of the program was based on which style they liked.
When Herbie returned to the States, he signed a contract with Atlantic Records. He used the melodies he'd heard in Africa and some of the handmade instruments he found there on his first Atlantic release, called The Common Ground. His band was as multinational as was his music. It included musicians from all over the world, from Puerto Rico to Nigeria. The music was new, fresh, and exciting. Herbie Mann.
The Common Ground. Well, I was looking for that common ground to show that there was a connection with all music. So where do you go? You go to Africa.
Percussionist Ray Barretto.
When he did the album Common Ground, which I did with him, it was a way of saying that somewhere there's a central point at which all music meets and the beauty of the music is revealed.
Sawa Sawa Day, from Herbie Mann's debut album for Atlantic, The Common Ground, recorded in 1960. Sawa Sawa Day was based on a melody Herbie heard from a group of children singing in Sierra Leone. On November 11, 1961, Herbie Mann cut a live album at New York's Village Gate nightclub. It was at this concert that the song Comin' Home Baby was recorded. It became the first major crossover hit of his career.
Comin' Home Baby was brought to me 2 days before we recorded the album by Ben Tucker, who was playing with Chris Connor, which was the other act at the club. And he played it for me, and I said, man, we should do this tune. So I brought him on stage for the tune, and he and Ahmad Abdul Malik, the bass player, one did boom, boom, the other one did ba-dooba, boom, boom, ba-dooba. And it became a monster hit.
Electricity was in the air that night in the village. It didn't matter that Comin' Home Baby ran over 8 minutes. The rhythm section's groove and Herbie Mann's charismatic performance, with eyes closed, standing half hula at the microphone, playing chorus after chorus, was mesmerizing.
Excitement, for me, is the criteria for a live album. And I knew how to be a crowd pleaser. Even, look, the Village Gate album, there's only 3 songs on the album. That's when we took full advantage of the capability of what an LP could have. And people used to say, nobody will play it. But the DJs loved it. They could go have coffee, go to the bathroom, and the song would still be playing.
Herbie Mann at the Village Gate sold more than 500,000 copies, an incredible number for a jazz album. It made Herbie a star. His manager, Monty Kaye, booked him and his band into New York nightclubs such as the Village Vanguard, the Half Note, and the 5 Spot. But once again, Herbie felt that he needed something more. That's just ahead. I'm Nancy Wilson, and it's a 70th birthday tribute to flutist Herbie Mann on Jazz Profiles from NPR, National Public Radio.
Born from the 32 Bar Blues clothing brand, the nonprofit 32 Bar Blues Foundation was established in 2020 to promote American music, literature, photography, and the artists that create within these genres. Jazz, blues, and roots music are of particular focus, all uniquely American art forms that should be nurtured and advanced for the benefit of future generations. Toward these goals, 32 Bar Blues Foundation seeks out and partners with nonprofit arts organizations that provide education, training, opportunity, support, and exposure. Young and emerging artists, as well as established and lesser-known greats, are of equal focus. Through direct 32 Bar Blues corporate support and donations, customer donations, and all profits received from special clothing items and other partner products in the 32 Bar Blues collection, seasonal contributions go directly to the artists and organizations noted in the Arts section of the 32 Bar Blues website. To date, 32 Bar Blues Foundation has contributed more than $200,000 to its nonprofit partners and provided millions of full-page impressions in the 32 Bar Blues catalog. For more information about 32 Bar Blues and its foundation, visit 32barblues.com and click The Arts or go to 32barbluesfoundation.org.
By 1962, Herbie Mann had a hit record with his At the Village Gate album. He was winning the annual Reader's Poll in Downbeat magazine and was becoming well known in the United States. But he was still unknown in an area that was becoming more and more attractive to him, Brazil.
I said to Monty Kay, I really am getting very bored. The drummers are the leaders of my band and I'm a sideman. I need something more. And I saw this movie, Black Orpheus. Black Orpheus really made going to Brazil very simple. It knocked you off the chair. Was having a tour going down to Brazil. He said, I have to go. Nobody knows you. I said, I'll go for nothing. I said, I'll ready to commit musical suicide if I don't go. I will go insane. I have to go to Brazil. After the concerts, I went to the Bottles Bar, heard Sergio Mendes playing, heard these guys playing, stayed up all night, listening to the music. And I said, my God, this is it.
Herbie Mann was Sergio Mendes's Bossa Nova Rio group and blues walk. In Brazilian music, Herbie Mann had found his new nirvana. He returned to the States intent on making a jazz album in Brazil. Charlie Byrd and Stan Getz had also latched on to Brazilian music, and their album, Jazz Samba, was creating a sensation. But Herbie wasn't impressed.
I was walking down Fifth Avenue, and I saw this Brazilian flag. I stormed inside, and I said, can I speak to the person in charge? You know, I'm a musician. My name's Herbie Mann, and I love Charlie Byrd, and I love Stan Getz, but the music has nothing to do with Brazil. Is that the kind of music, that's the kind of record you want to show what Brazilian music is about? The guy starts laughing, and he says, this is the Economic Council. He said, but let me get on the phone, called up the cultural attaché, got an appointment, went to speak to her. By the time I got through, I had 2 first-class tickets on Varig. I had talked Atlantic into it. We went to Brazil, held court every night at the Copacabana Palace, and the musicians would come and play their music. And then I picked the tunes, picked the musicians, and we did the album.
In the early 1960s, the bossa nova swept through the United States with the same energy that bebop had 2 decades earlier, and Herbie Mann, who helped spearhead the movement, watched as it enveloped the American jazz scene.
Everybody did it. At that point, everybody did everything. Everybody recorded The Girl from Ipanema, Desafinado, One Note Samba. Then that became the new repertoire. It wasn't Charlie Parker. The crossover repertoire then was the bossa nova. Well, we reached that point where everybody and his brother was playing the bossa nova. And I said, it's time for me to take a break. So Middle Eastern music was an obvious choice for me. I added an oud player, Chicanimian, and we started looking into Middle Eastern music.
The result was Impressions of the Middle East, the next incarnation in Herbie's lifelong goal, researching and assimilating the music of other cultures. Arif Mardin was the co-producer on the album Impressions of the Middle East. The young Turkish-born graduate from the Berklee School of Music later became one of Atlantic's top executives.
The creativity and the electricity was intoxicating, actually. It was wonderful because jazz sessions are always like that. It's not where you go into a structured pop situation. You would take ideas from the musicians and say, okay, keep that. That's a great lick. Don't lose that. You know, that kind of attitude. It's like almost like making a soup.
Üsküdar, based on a traditional song from Istanbul that Herbie Mann turned into a genuine Turkish delight. It was featured on the album Impressions of the Middle East from 1966. By 1968, Herbie Mann was ready for another change, but this time he found himself exploring music closer to home.
I was in London, and the Stax Vault tour came to London. And after the concert, because Tom Dowd was there recording it for Stax, we went to this discotheque. And while we were there, they were playing these records, and this record came on. And I said, Tom, listen to that record. He says, I'll see what it is. He went in the booth, he came out with a record. It was a record called Mercy by Willie Mitchell.
Willie Mitchell's recording of Mercy inspired Herbie Mann to turn his attention to rhythm and blues and soul. As he had done before, he went to the source, in this case, Memphis, where he hired the best rhythm section in town.
Turns out, they were the rhythm section for Willie Mitchell. They made up the groove. Willie called it his tune. There was only one different player, otherwise it was the same band. You know, I mean, 1 million studios in the world, 1 million rhythm sections. I find a record in London, bring it to Memphis, and it's the same rhythm section.
Afro-Cuban music historian Raul Rico Jr.
I mean, they were a total machine, man. They were a record-making machine, and they were groove mongers, man. It was genius. Whoever put those guys together.
Years later, this young black girl came over to me at a concert and said, "Don't tell me you're white." I said, "I've made over 100 records. Do you think I look black?" She says, "Man, listen to your music." I said, "Well, that just proves that color of one's skin has nothing to do with their heart and soul."
Herbie Mann's Memphis Underground became his best-selling record ever. Once again, it was the combination of Herbie's flute and a solid rhythm section that created a groove that was impossible to shake. But the record was not without controversy. Guitarist Sonny Sharrock provided a searing Jimi Hendrix-influenced solo that sent jazz critics scurrying for cover.
Oh, they've always hated me. I mean, I was the Kenny G of the 60s. Hey, you know, people would run up to the stage and stamp their fists and say, "That's not jazz!" And Sonny jarred a lot of people. But, you know, I was sticking my tongue out at the idea that jazz was Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis. I said jazz is nobody. And they said, "You're wrong, jazz is this tradition." And I would say, well, then why don't you just call my music something else?
It's a tribute to flutist Herbie Mann on NPR's Jazz Profiles. I'm Nancy Wilson. With Memphis Underground, Herbie Mann had broken into the mainstream, leaving many jazz purists behind. In 1969, Atlantic Records gave Herbie the opportunity to produce records under his own label, which he called Embryo. For the next few years, he continued his experiments with soul, R&B, and funk. In 1971, he recorded Push Push, featuring the last recordings of rock guitarist Duane Allman. Herbie Mann had crossed yet another musical boundary, but many were shocked by the album's provocative artwork, which showed a bare-chested Herbie posing with his flute casually resting on his shoulder.
And also it was the first jazz record that ever had a jazz musician sewing skin on the cover. And Nessa Weirdigan said to me, "Why are you killing this record with this cover?" I said, "Trust me." Well, the cover caused a scandal. Radio station said, "Unless you change your ways, we're never going to play your music again." They thought it was pornography. And it was a scandal. Well, it was a calculated scandal. But the bottom line was, if the record didn't happen, it didn't matter what the cover was.
In the 1970s, Herbie explored other parts of the musical universe. He recorded albums of reggae, British rock, and Japanese music. But when it came to jazz fusion, Herbie drew the line.
That concept of groove was not the concept of the groove I grew up with. I wanted steady. I wanted R&B. I wanted Latin. I wanted intensity. I wanted heat. I didn't think that music did that.
So Herbie turned to another popular musical form of the 1970s, disco. Although his song Hijack became a top 20 crossover hit, it further distanced him from the jazz community that had followed him throughout his career.
Whatever critics were left who thought that maybe there's some chance, they gave up on me. That was it.
After Hijack, Herbie Mann lost his core audience. He returned briefly to Brazilian music, but in 1980, he and Atlantic Records parted company.
After I left Atlantic, I was living on Park Avenue pretending that I was the most successful jazz musician in the world. And I was struggling. I made records on my own that didn't do very well.
Herbie Mann had spent his entire career challenging his fans and his critics to come with him on his musical safaris. But by the 1980s, Herbie was no longer a force in jazz.
I think the disco records did it. But also the business changed. The yuppies coming in, West Coast, fusion music. And even though a lot of my music was easy listening jazz, it didn't fit into the formula. I didn't want to be formularized. And I didn't want anybody telling me that this was the sound you need to do to get your record played on the air. And then I decided that it was time to see if I could do it myself. So I formed Cocopelli. And I went to all the musicians I knew that didn't have record contracts, Les McCann, Roy Ayers, David Newman, and asked them if they wanted to do a co-op record. And we did Deep Pocket.
Cocopelli the ancient Indian god of fertility, who is depicted playing a flute, became the logo for Herbie Mann's new record label in 1992. Its spirit of healing, harmony, and magic revitalized Herbie's career. Having his own label and moving to the serene New Mexico town of Santa Fe gave Herbie Mann a new and mellower perspective. He became more spiritual and philosophical. In the late 1990s, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, but this did not deter his positive outlook on life.
When all of a sudden you see the possibility that you're not going to live forever, you start looking at your life and looking at what you want to be remembered for. So it dawned on me that my whole life I've played music I've loved, but wasn't really my heritage. I'm not Cuban, I'm not Brazilian, I'm not black, I'm not Jamaican, I'm not Middle Eastern. I'm an Eastern European Jew. Why don't I just go there now?
Herbie Mann devotes much of his time and energy to prostate cancer awareness. Although he is still actively performing, he looks back on his career with a great sense of accomplishment.
I mean, the flute was something that everybody said couldn't happen. Brazilian music was something that everybody said wouldn't happen. World music was some little bid in the record store. I think that there are people who are more tolerant of more different music forms than before. And I think I had a part in that.
And decades after his first encounter with jazz at the Paramount Theater in Brooklyn, New York, Herbie Mann has realized his lifelong goal.
My wish all along was to be as synonymous with the flute as Benny Goodman was with the clarinet. And I think I've done that.
Our tribute to Herbie Mann was written and produced by Cary Ginell. Post-production engineers are Leo Del Aguila and Chuck Thompson. Jazz Profiles is produced by Tim Owens. Senior editor, Greg Fitzgerald. Assistant producer, Madeline Smith. Administrative assistant, Linda Browan.